The world is complex, the Bible is complex. Human existence is a tangled ball of experience, perception, and understanding. Ravel is a puzzling word, denoting both a tangling and untangling. This podcast attempts to hold honest conversations in good faith. Some ideas expressed in this podcast will be challenging. Others will be obvious. When a PhD in biblical interpretation and a habitually podcasting man-child discuss matters of society, scripture, and scandal, you get Ravel.
Hey everybody, you are listening to Ravel, and it's me, your best buddy Basil, and with me as always is the swarthy sermonizer, the holler-at-you scholar, the professional Jesus freak, Dr. Christopher Ryan Cates. What's up, dude?
What's up, man? There was a lot of force in that one. That came from the bowels.
Yeah, they're starting to get aggressive, and that's okay. You know, we're almost 50 episodes in.
Yeah.
When you choose a fun little game to play on the intro of your podcast, any potential podcasters out there, just remember, you'll have to do it forever. But here we are again, Dr. Chris. How are you doing? Are you staying cool in this very hot summer of ours?
So long as I stay indoors, yeah. Yeah. It's down here in Central Florida. It is warm. I was just talking to somebody about it. Where was I? What was I doing yesterday? Oh, no. I was coming back I went up north for a wedding for my cousin, and I was coming back with my sister, and we were several hours north of us, and we were commenting on the heat, and, we weren't even home yet where it would be warmer, and it's not even August yet, and August is usually the hottest month out of the year, so not really looking forward to that very much.
Yeah, it's a hot one.
Scorcher.
We'll hit triple digits this week, and I don't have air conditioning in the studio. So
That's not true. You don't have AC?
No.
Well, I know you're in transition right now, but
there's
no AC.
I mean, I have a portable air conditioning box, but I have one for the whole house, and because they're expensive, man. These air conditioners are expensive.
Sure, yeah.
Thousands. And so, bringing it downstairs, it's also extremely heavy. Now, look, I'm a big, beefy, strong boy, but carrying that 150-pound air conditioner up and down the stairs from the bedroom to the studio is not an option to do daily. So I've resorted to ice packs.
Part of your regimen.
Right, I know. I wouldn't need to actually hit the gym.
Yeah. Just move the AC unit.
Yeah, which is exactly what you want to do when you're sweltering in your own home, is carry super heavy things up and down stairs. The point is, I've got this
you said.
new strategy, ice packs, podcasting with ice packs.
Okay.
Look, I've had it too easy for too long, Chris.
Yeah.
I used to keep the house at a cool, collected 67 degrees.
67?
All year long. It was like an ice box.
Wow.
And it's been an important season of growth for me
67.
to know that I can survive when the house is at almost 80 degrees all day long.
Oh my gosh.
This is so outside the realm of what we're supposed to be talking
really
about
is.
right now.
I was wondering if you'd be able to tie it in expertly somehow, but
this segue, and much like how the heat is growing in the studio here, it's also getting hot here on Ravel. That's right, we've got the hottest guest ever. I don't know what he looks like. I'm just saying his brain. Something. We're making it work, folks. No, we have a wonderful guest today. A wonderful conversation. You'll hear so many times throughout the conversation, I'm just sort of stricken speechless, which, if you've listened to the show before, you know that that's a big deal.
It is.
Yes, it's Dr. Cory Barnes, who is someone who Dr. Christopher Ryan Cates has a lot of respect for, and you know what? Don't ever take Chris at his word, but I've never not agreed after having a conversation with somebody. I've never not agreed with Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates's assessment of their knowledge, their friendliness, and their ability to completely astound me with what they have to say.
Yeah. Yeah, Cory was a guy, you'll hear, we'll talk a little bit about it just as the show opens, but we were doing our PhD work. He was at the end of his right when I was coming in, so we overlapped there just for a little bit. And he was just one of those guys who always in, a group of a bunch of really smart, and hardworking guys, he was one that always just kind of seemed like he was out in front a little bit of some of the rest of us. He's just done a lot already in his, young career there. And as somebody that I've always kind of looked to, and have gone to him for guidance at times, and kind of somebody I've tried to emulate in whatever ways that I can. And just a really smart guy, very generous, very humble, very kind, all of the things that you would want in somebody who's going to be giving you any kind of instruction. And just reached out to him here recently about a few other things that are kind of in the works between us. And then, was asking him, hey, do you want to come talk about some fun stuff on the show? He's got... I don't think we mentioned it, but I'll try to put the link in. I'll have it in the outro. He's got a YouTube channel that he posts kind of for his students, but he'll just do mini lectures on there, and they're really fascinating. And I just came across one and thought that'd be really fun to talk about on the show. So we had him on, and we're going to talk about all kinds of different stuff.
All sorts of things.
Yeah, it goes everywhere.
All sorts of things. It's awesome. And in case anybody was disappointed that there's not more of a sort of official sounding bio, well, take this. Cory Barnes has been blessed to teach God's Word to college and seminary students since 2015. He serves as the Associate Vice President for Distance Learning and Associate Professor of Hebrew and Old Testament at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. Did you know this? He also serves as pastor of discipleship at First Baptist Church of New Orleans. He's the co-author of Kingdom Students and the author of From Creed to Canon. Cory and his family enjoy spending time with their church family and NOBTS faculty and students exploring New Orleans, camping, reading, and disc golf. Disc golf, folks. What a multifaceted creature this man is.
Yeah, that didn't make it into the interview, disc golf.
No, it didn't. But it made it into the intro, and now what you just heard about disc golf will now color your perception of everything Dr. Cory says in the interview that is to follow. And it is to follow, unless Dr. Chris has something more important to talk about.
No, I'm waiting for a really creative kind of last introductory word from you here to lead into this interview.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Well, folks, like the Olympians of ancient Greece, you've seen them carved into marble, from marble, or perhaps they were within the marble all along, holding the discus, twirling elegantly, masculinely through the air. 1, 2, 3 spins around it. On the third, planting their feet and hurling the disc far, far into the distance. In a moment of silence, the crowd waits. And then you hear the jingle jangle of the disc golf hole. It's a hole-in-one, folks. That's Dr. Cory Barnes. And now that he is officially proven to us that he is some sort of supernaturally improved and empowered child of God, and is standing on the podium wearing the laurels with a medal around his neck as the coolest and most effective disc golfer in the world. Now he shares with us his thoughts on God.
Well, I got what I asked for.
And you're the only one to blame. Okay, here we are, folks, and with us we have Dr. Cory Barnes, a talented man, a smart man, another one of these smart guys. You heard me say it once, and I'm not sure I'll say it again, but I did say Dr. Cory Barnes. Another stepping stone in my ultimate goal to collect them all, like some sort of Pokemon master. Dr. Cory Barnes, how you doing, buddy? Thanks for being here.
Doing well, Basil. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, this is exciting. This is Chris. This is another one of your one of your finds, one of your fellows, right? You know Cory, huh?
Yeah, I'm just snagging all the smart guys and the heavy hitters. So yeah, Cory, I met in my time up there at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. We were in, just ever so briefly, we were in a PhD program together. A different emphasis than mine. He specialized in Old Testament. But we had one seminar together, which I showed up to one time. That was theological interpretation of Scripture, some of which I think Cory will be talking about today. But I was trying to do the full Monty my very first semester, where you take 2 seminars and 1 reading colloquium. And for people listening out there, they don't know what that means, but Cory knows it's a difficult task. So TIS was my elective, and I sat in on the first class, and the conversation got heavy really quick, and I thought, I am way out of my depth here. And I ended up dropping that class. But that was the only one single class Cory and I had together. But we maintained something of a friendship. And he would, deny it or downplay it, but something of a kind of local, not going to say celebrity there on campus.
Not going to say celebrity.
But he was a favorite of the student body there for a long time. People were, suggesting things like he should become part of admin, maybe even become the president of the school, those sorts of things.
My God.
He ended up graduating, taking a position over at Shorter University in Georgia. We were all sad to see him go, but then through a bunch of hard work, they convinced him to come back and to work back at NOBTS, where he has been now for a couple of years, I think, right, Cory? 2-3 years now you've been back?
Just right at a year. So
is it?
Wow.
I think,
Chris, I would say, Chris, you're exaggerating my time at NOBTS, much like you're exaggerating the feelings of the student body.
That's not true. There were lots of people that spoke very highly of you while we were there, myself included. So there were many of us who were just getting started in the program as you were getting done, who kind of looked to you as somebody that we thought we would like to follow in your footsteps. So you can be as humble as you want to about it, but you definitely inspired and motivated a lot of your peers. And now you are kind of leading the way there in a really fun position there at New Orleans. How's that been going? You are the associate professor of Old Testament, right, in Hebrew, and the vice president of distance learning, yeah?
So associate vice president.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not a vice president. I'm just associated with
associate to the vice president.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. So it's a lot of fun, man. Like, I really enjoy the teaching that I'm getting to do, and I enjoy leading our distance learning team, doing stuff through our online and extension centers and that kind of thing. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Now the trap is laid. Chris, you've done a wonderful job. Dr. Cory feels safe. Mm-hmm. He feels appreciated. And now it's time to spring the trap. Why? Tell someone who has never attended as a student, some sort of higher learning facility. Why is your major better than his major?
Yeah, I mean, as far as my major better than Chris's major,
yeah.
I don't think it's better, right? I think that
attaboy.
And I will say, Chris is a biblical studies student. If Chris had studied something outside of biblical studies, I'd probably have more fun here.
We are united on that front. We're both biblical studies, but our areas of specialization are a little bit different.
Yeah, so Chris did biblical interpretation, which is basically gives him the ability to cross intertestamental stuff and really focus on hermeneutics or biblical theology. I did Old Testament, so I was focused on Hebrew and some Old Testament interpretation issues. But they're really close together as far as what we can do. And I would say that I think Chris and I both share an interest on studying biblical theology and intertextuality. So we're pretty tangential, man. I'll lob a hand grenade though, Basil, and just say the reason I think that you should study biblical studies if given the opportunity, this is coming from me as a biblical studies guy, is the triune God has revealed himself to us in the scriptures. So why would you want to study anything else?
Yes, that's right.
Oh,
that's right.
It has begun. Dance, my smart little puppets. Dance for me. This is so fun. So I am curious, and I'm going to need to rely on Chris to kind of know the right directions to go here. I mean, it feels like these important yet possibly slightly confusing differences in where you guys focus your attention and your scholarly work. When you're talking to, say, on a podcast, hypothetically, say you're on a podcast that has something like close to 75% of the entire population of the earth listens to this podcast, hypothetically. Whereas a focus in biblical interpretation is sort of an easily grasped concept. Christians or people who are interested in the Bible, you put those two words together, biblical interpretation. Let's interpret the Bible. Wow, that makes so much sense. And they can apply that to their own practical interactions with the Bible. Where can, if someone was listening and they thought to themselves, I'm going to absorb so much good information, and I am going to apply this to the way that I view the world, just give them a little bit of an idea how and why they would practically apply what they learned in this episode talking to you to their lives.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know how much of this will come up like in the episode, right? As far as just studying biblical interpretation, how that has like practical application. One of the things that I'll sometimes challenge students with, especially some of my teaching has been done outside of like the seminary classroom. So I've taught a lot of students that took a class in Old Testament or New Testament because they were at a college to play football or baseball or get a degree in education, and we made them take this course. So I'm in those types of settings, one of the things that I know I have to do as a professor is convince them that this is important, right? So I think that kind of brings us into your question. Here's what I challenge them with, and that's that the Bible is the most influential book in the world. We can put a period there. Right?
Undoubtedly, yeah.
There's other influential books, but the Bible's the most influential. And so certainly for those of us who are dialoguing with the Bible because we confess that it's God's revelation to us, we have a whole set of beliefs and understandings about the Bible. And I want to affirm those are right and good. And at the core, that's why I've dedicated my life to the study of this book. But say you've got that 75% of the world's population, which would mean you have a lot of people who aren't even Christians, don't claim to be Christians.
It's true.
They still live in a world where the conversations around them, the policies that surround them, the geopolitical system in which they live is influenced and driven by people who make claims about what the Bible says. So as Americans, we can really think about this, right? As Americans, we are in a political system where both major political parties are constantly going to be going back and forth about who has the biblical position on this issue or that issue.
Right.
I would contend that if you know nothing about what the Bible says, you are at the mercy of others to basically tell you what the Bible says. And by the way, that's in these like polar opposite ends of the spectrum. So the Ku Klux Klan will tell you that they're a Christian organization, and so will the Southern Poverty Law Center, who's going to tell you that they're dedicated to stamping out organization like the Ku Klux Klan. And so if you're going to actually know, well, which one is biblical, which one actually has a claim to be Christian or claim to be based on biblical principles, you're going to have to know something about the Bible for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've seen a really clear case study here recently with the Supreme Court decision on Roe v. Wade is just as one for instance, where you have people on both sides of that issue claiming that they are the ones who are standing up for a biblical ethic, and I hear it on both sides, and we won't get into the discussion here, but that's just one recently where you can kind of sit there and say, like, how are you making a biblical argument? And you hear people on both sides kind of question the other. And it is something that you have to be able to, if this is something that you're claiming, and especially for each one of us as believers, if you are a Christian, then you use the Bible as the foundation for your entire worldview, for every matter that is related to morality and spirituality. And it's extremely important that you're able to come to it and handle it correctly. Make sure that you have the right tools, the right approaches and resources in order to get a proper understanding from it, because real decisions are being made in our lives, as individuals, as a nation, for our families, all of those things, and they have impacts on us. So yeah, there is no shortage of importance or application for every person as an individual.
And it's interesting, as we do see both sides of the political spectrum, and you can apply this to, other sort of dialectic situations outside of politics as well. If you have spent enough time with the Bible, such as, well, all of us here, but, I've since the day I was born, I've been in contact with the Bible, have had, just a lifelong roller coaster of understanding, and thankfully, the smallest amount of academic work, homework to be done on the Bible. You can really almost instantly tell when someone or some group is trying to co-opt either the message or the authority or the influence that quoting the Bible could have, but based on their context, based on their use of certain scriptures or misuse of certain scriptures, it's nice to have an idea when somebody's trying to pull a fast one on you in regards to how they reflect on scripture or something like that. And it's always been interesting to me, the moments in time when somebody will claim to have a position supported by scriptures, but also the support of, just sort of like cultural common sense. And I've always found that fascinating, because I don't believe at its very core, at least, especially in the time that it was written, cultural common sense was, what is the word I'm looking for? There was, there's so many similarities. I guess that's the word, the common sense thing. They'll refer to something called sort of cultural common sense, and they'll apply that to the Bible. But there are through lines through the Bible that also can be arrived at from outside the Bible. And I guess I'm trying to sort of meander in an ineffective way into ancient Near Eastern mythos, and how that the connections between not just the Bible but also culture as a whole can be accessed as a sort of control mechanism when a group is trying to sway opinions in one way or another. Does any of these words make any sense to you?
Yeah, I think that part of the conversation that we're having is, essentially that we do tend to read the Bible through the lens of our own culture. Mm-hmm. And we tend to assume that the values of our culture overlap with the values of the Bible. And in fact, a lot of times we have blurred lines between what's a cultural value and what's a biblical value.
Right.
And we forget that Paul tells us that we preach Christ crucified, which is a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles, meaning that it actually doesn't make sense of either of the major worldviews that Paul is talking about. So on the one hand, we have a message that's inherently countercultural. We also are dealing with a God who graciously speaks to us in our context. So we have kind of two truths that we need to hold in contrast here. And that is, the message of the Bible is unique revelation that transcends culture. And if you are claiming to follow the God who has revealed himself in the Bible, at some point is going to contradict culture and is going to challenge you to hold values that are not in your culture and reject values that your culture holds dear. So that's one side.
Oh my gosh.
The other side is that to
real
understand.
quick, can I just? I just need to take a breath of gratitude. In that, folks, this is why you got to talk to smart people, because you can start a sentence and have an emotion about what you want to talk about, and it can make almost no sense even to yourself, and a smart person knows exactly what you're trying to say. I appreciate that, Cory. You're the man.
Well, I'm glad that turned out well, man.
Yeah, so it's turning out well for me. I'm not sure exactly how this will end up for you, but for me, so far so good.
Gotcha, man.
Sorry to
interrupt. The other side of that, right, is that so there's a question then of if our context isn't going to be privileged, if we can't assume that the Bible just says whatever my culture essentially wants the Bible to say. Mm-hmm. We say, well, then how do we read the Bible in a way where the Bible itself is authoritative and not my culture, my tradition, or even just me as an interpreter? And I would say an anchor point for that. I would argue not the extent of that, but an anchor point is to say, okay, well, let's try to understand the Bible through the lens that it was through the lens of the culture that originally read the Bible, through the lens of the authors who wrote the Bible. And that requires us to look at ancient Near Eastern context. One way to put that, I think, is just the best antidote to the poison of only reading things through my own context is to read the Bible through the lens of the original context. So we can start there. There's doctrinal development that has to happen from there, and we'll get into that if we talk about theological interpretation of scriptures and that kind of thing. But we do need to understand the importance of the original context, because if I'm not looking at the original context, I just assume my context is right.
Absolutely. And I don't know if this is for better or for worse, but when you do that, so many of the things that are offensive to the casual reader or the casual, quoter of the Bible, for better or for worse, when you look at it in its original context, it's actually really revolutionary in a lot of ways. Whereas there are things that you can, that are brought up when somebody's trying to, say something mean about the Bible, about, whatever, whether it has to do with the role of women in either the New or the Old Testament, the treatment of slaves or the existence of slaves, or the slave yes or no question, check the box, things like this. You can quote from the Bible and really come out with a fairly offensive, terms of engagement. But when you put it into the context, it's actually almost completely opposite. Now, of course, this can go a lot of different ways depending on the conversation. But it's one of the things that I love about when someone who is trying to not disprove or I guess discredit the relevance of the Bible today, they'll bring something up about, some culturally relevant current topic and say, see, the Bible is actually horrible in our modern context. And they really don't like it when you try to talk about it in its original context, because it often completely destroys the point they're trying to make.
Yeah, I think that's right, man. An example of what you're pointing towards here is like in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Because 1 Corinthians chapter 7, in the early part of that chapter, Paul says something there that if we understand it in its context, man, it's revolutionary about the role of women in the ancient world.
Yeah.
Paul starts saying in verse 3, like a husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise a wife to her husband. A wife does not have a right over her own body, but her husband does. And if you stop right there, everybody in the ancient world is just nodding their head. I don't know how they would have felt about verse 3, but whenever Paul says a wife does not have the right over her own body, her husband does, everybody's nodding their head saying, yeah, that's how our culture understands the role of women as their property, their husbands. But then Paul says in the same way, a husband does not have the right over his own body, but his wife does. And that just explodes.
Exactly.
Against the contrast of like what the culture expects. And here's what it's telling us, right? It's telling us that the Bible is, as God's words to us, transcends like what a particular culture wants.
Yeah.
And so then, it gets back to the question of, well, why then care about the original context at all? Because what we need to hear there is that in its original first century context, 1 Corinthians 7 is giving us a countercultural understanding of the role of men and women within marriage. So it shouldn't surprise us when in the 21st century context, 1 Corinthians 7 is giving us a countercultural role or understanding of the role of men and women within marriage. It's a uniquely biblical understanding of what marriage looks like and how husbands and wives should approach one another within marriage. And that's, if the Bible is what we say it is as Christians, that's actually what we should expect. If it's just what our culture says, then why do we need revelation? But it's not just what our culture says. So we understand it based on its ancient Near Eastern culture, but and in its first century culture. But we understand that it spoke into that culture in countercultural ways, and it continues to speak into our culture in countercultural ways.
Yeah, and this is one of the areas, kind of to get back to that original question that Basil was asking about, like the relevance of what we do in academia, is that there is a sense in which, and you never want to discount anybody's engagement with the Bible. You never want to say your Aunt Sally, who wakes up every morning at 5 a.m. and spends, 2 hours reading her Bible, and she receives, revelation and inspiration and things like that from the text, that we want to discount those things. But there's this balance between coming to it, as you were saying, from our current sort of worldview, kind of our current perspective in reading the text of Scripture from the 21st century, Western mindset, that there are lots of things that can easily be missed, and it takes a certain amount of very diligent work. It takes a lot of time, a lot of study, a lot of reading to start to gain a worldview that's going to reflect more appropriately and closely that of the ancient Near Eastern worldview, in which the Bible was written from the authors and to its recipients. And a lot of times having that perspective, as difficult as it may be to gain, is like this key that unlocks all of these different mysteries that you maybe didn't even know that the Bible was holding. You're kind of coming to it just assuming the Bible was written for me, almost to me. And there's, of course, a distinction to be made as for me and to me, because I've talked about on the show here before, and I talk about in my classes and from the pulpit, that the Bible was not written to any of us. It was not written to us. It was written to the original audiences. That it is for all of us, but we can't understand what the Bible means for us today if we don't understand what the Bible meant to its original audience. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about some of the work that you've been doing. And most recently here, I want to get into the article that you wrote that's going to be coming out here in the upcoming Jets. But before we get to that, because that's a little more specific, I want to talk broadly kind of about the idea of the ancient Near Eastern worldview and kind of some of the mythos there. And I think that a lot of our audience is going to be familiar with, this might be a nice entry point, with the kind of that film that came out some time ago, Zeitgeist. I don't know if you saw that, Cory, or if you're familiar with that. It was kind of this like little pop culture phenomena where this guy put together this little movie, and he was trying to expose, Basil, you might remember, there were like, I think 4 sections. It was like spirituality and government and finance and something.
Yeah, it's kind of
else.
like it's for our generation, it's kind of like the OG anti-religion, anti-capitalism, anti-da-da-da-da-da sort of conspiracy theory Rosetta Stone almost.
Yeah. And one of the points I kind of actually agreed with a lot of the elements of the film that he put together there, except for when it came to the religious aspect. And one of the things that he tries to do is say that the biblical narrative is actually just a copy of so many of these other ancient kind of creation myths and the different redemptive myths through some of their gods and things like that. And he says, you have in the Egyptian culture, you have, this constant cycle of death and rebirth and those sorts of things, and this resurrection from the dead and all that. And he says, and see, it's just the same as Jesus. Jesus is just another iteration of that. And recently here, you've been doing some work, and I saw a couple videos that you put out on YouTube where you were covering this, where there's this discussion as to kind of who actually is the originator of these stories, as Christians and evangelicals and even, our Jewish kind of brothers and sisters, if we can, claim that we have the authoritative and definitive creation account, but it is so similar to some of these other creation accounts in the ancient Near East. So a lot of times critics of the Bible will come and say, well, see, that we see these same sorts of stories all throughout history, so yours isn't really special. It's not really any different. It's just one in a long list of others. And these are just stories that people invented to explain these realities that they had no answers for. So it's kind of just a broad introduction to that. But can you talk about kind of some of the relation that we see between some of these other pagan and polytheistic creation accounts, if you will, and then what we have in, the Genesis account?
Yeah, for sure. So I haven't seen the Zeitgeist movie. I had not heard of that before, but I will say, the argument that you're talking about, that it sounds like that film presents, it's a common one. It's an old argument. And if we just want to see how old, right, like 1903. Right, there was two presentations that was given before the German Society for Oriental Study, called Babel und Bibel. So Babel, or Babylon in the Bible. It was given by Friedrich Delitzsch, and it was so influential that Kaiser Wilhelm II attended. So the Emperor of Germany attended. And by the way, just in the background to this discussion, at that time, if you ever wondered how Germany, progressed to this radical anti-Semitism, whenever they were a nation, majority Christian nation that would have thought, well, you share this Old Testament text with Jewish people, how in the world could that happen? This is part of that story, is that, there were papers like this one that essentially said the entire Old Testament is just a copying of Babylonian mythology. So anyway, it's an old argument. Let's talk about here's I think the strongest piece of evidence against this. Let's talk about Genesis in particular, and that's just to read the Old Testament myths. The ancient Near Eastern myths, and put them up against Genesis, right? And in particular, probably the most common ancient Near Eastern myth that people will say, well, see, this is just like Genesis, is Enuma Elish. Some of us might have been exposed to this in high school in some level. If you did like a world lit class, there might have been either an excerpt from Enuma Elish, or even just like an aside that the Babylonian myth Enuma Elish is, influences Genesis or something like that. And then definitely, if students go to college and they take a class to college, that's like the Bible is literature or something, this is a very common thing to run into. And so the argument kind of runs like, well, if you read Enuma Elish, you'll see that it's, Genesis is based off the ideas in Enuma Elish. Well, here's the thing. Here's basically what happens in Enuma Elish. This is like the 90-second version. You have the god Kingu and the goddess Tiamat, who are kind of the primordial parents of the gods, and they're going to decide that some of the other gods have gotten on their nerves for various reasons, and Kingu is going to rise up and kill these other gods, who, by the way, are his children. It's a pretty common theme in ancient mythology. And what's going to happen is the other gods are going to instead kill Kingu. Tiamat, his wife, his consort, is super mad about this. And I've been saying Kingu. I'm sorry, it was Apsu is the male god there. So anyway, they've killed Apsu, who was going to kill the other gods. Tiamat, his wife, is very mad about this. She's kind of personified as this like watery chaos dragon, and so she rises up and is going to do war against the other gods. She takes another husband. His name is Kingu, so that's where I got that mixed up. And they're going to do war against the gods. All the other gods are super scared. The chief deity El is super scared. He's kind of cowering. He won't say anything. And so we have a new hero deity that rises up. His name is pretty familiar to us. His name is Marduk, who's a god that we have kind of come up in some biblical literature, right? So Marduk is going to rise up. Marduk is going to slay Tiamat, and he is going to cut Tiamat into two pieces. The bottom half of Tiamat is going to be the waters below the earth. The top half of Tiamat is going to be the waters above the earth. Then Marduk is going to decide that the gods don't need to work, and so he's going to fashion human beings, and he's going to do so by taking Kingu, who had joined Tiamat in the rebellion, and he's going to execute Kingu, and from his blood make human beings. So that's Enuma Elish. There's also a whole lot of stuff in Enuma Elish about basically the last half of it is basically just all these names in praise of Marduk. Now, here's the thing. Are there similarities? Yes, in the big picture. The waters below and the waters above. That's a Genesis 1 thing. The fact that we have this monster rising up out of the deeps. There's places in the Bible where we see something like that, not really in Genesis. But the idea that story and the story that we're told in Genesis 1 and 2 is the same, I think is really laughable. So we have themes, and we definitely see that the ancient people share a cosmic geography. There's waters below the earth, there's waters above the earth. That's true. I think that's shared between the Babylonian culture that has Enuma Elish and the Old Testament. But the idea that God is presented in the same way or that human beings are presented in the same way, that's just not the case. So kind of to introduce that, Chris, I would say that would be my initial pushback is just read those ancient myths you're talking about. And kind of that common sense test that we started talking about at the beginning will just tell you like that just doesn't work. They're just not the same.
Yeah. I've always thought about it in terms of like the Epic of Gilgamesh too. I mean, you have obviously very similar themes and aspects as the Noah account that we have in Genesis, but there are certainly some things that make it quite different too. And I think that one of the points of argument that critics of the Bible bring up is they say, well, see, everybody has a story like this, and they think that that's actually a point that's going to kind of bolster the fact that we should discount the Bible. But I always have seen that as something that it's like, well, doesn't that reinforce the fact that these ancient people actually had a common understanding of something that seems to have actually taken place? Why is it that we would see these stories that seem kind of similar while we might have, some points of major contention that are really going to affect our theology, especially if you're talking about a monotheistic sort of Judeo-Christian worldview as opposed to the polytheistic of most of the pagan societies and things like that. But it just brings to mind the fact that there is some kind of truth that is here. And I really like the fact that Jesus uses parables to teach, because he finds these teaching points all around the created world. And it is almost like truth is woven into the fabric of creation, and you can't help but observe it in some way. The disparity, I think, comes in what do we do with those observations, and how do we filter those through whatever kind of lens it is that we're seeing the world. And everybody in the world, even today and going all the way back, makes certain truth claims, and they say that they understand the truth because, and then they will explain their worldview, and that's why they have arrived at the truth. And what I believe about the Judeo-Christian worldview is that we have just kind of data after data after data. And you do a lot of work in archaeology too, which is really fun, because the more we continue to find, the more that we find that the biblical stories and narratives there is actually factual evidence to support all of those. So then when it comes to these discrepancies, well, like who is actually has the proper creation account of the world? And of course, modern science is going to say that none of them do. But there is time after time so much evidence that we find in archaeology that confirms all of these different stories in the Bible. And it's one of the things that I came to appreciate in my times doing biblical study. Archaeology, kind of always thought it was boring and dusty and dry, and who cares about pottery shards? But of course, spending some time with Dr. Cole, you learn about the importance of all of these things, and we continue to find over and over again, these very tangible sorts of reminders that the Bible actually is true. And then that lends itself to, these types of discussions when we have discrepancies in whoever's worldview wins out. But you do see, I think, really interestingly, in Genesis. So I want to hear your thoughts on this, because we have in the ancient Near Eastern kind of polytheistic and pagan sorts of religions, in the Canaanite and Phoenician sorts of religions, there you have this sort of nemesis that rises up out of the waters, that you have this kind of chaos that's going on in the waters, and that's kind of where the however the evil, or perhaps even the hero god kind of comes from, depending on which side you're on. But in Genesis, the Genesis account opens with the fact that the Spirit of God was hovering over the deep, and you kind of have this almost pre-existent, and I'd like to hear your take on this. I haven't actually heard you talk about this before, but this kind of pre-existent watery sort of chaos, this like dark abyss that seems to already be there, that Yahweh comes. Yeah. That Yahweh comes and kind of speaks order into. So what's going on there, and how does that relate to some of these ancient Near Eastern myths?
Yeah, good question. So to answer in particular about the why is it that water shows up in the Bible, and we do have, like in Enuma Elish, this and not just in Enuma Elish, like same thing in Baal and Yam, which is a Canaanite myth. We have this kind of cultural symbol that waters, and especially the oceans, are chaotic. So I actually think that's a really easy one to understand. And let's just let's understand something about our culture as opposed to their culture. It'd be fun if we could talk some about how these stories and what they're trying to do is actually not that different from what science tries to do in our modern culture. Maybe we can talk about that in a moment. But we live in a culture where our base worldview, our base cosmology comes from science, right? So that means that we've named things and we've charted things. And so if you ask us, is the sea a place of, chaos? Is the sea this place where you worry about evil things? Do you believe in sea monsters? Almost everybody says no. But think about this for a moment. When you go to the beach, how if you walk out into the water far enough and you hit that place where your feet leave the bottom?
Terrifying.
And all of a sudden you realize you really do believe in sea monsters. You just call them different things.
Yeah.
All right, so let's understand that it's something that we can still understand in a sense today, that the sea is this chaotic place. Now imagine the sea in a culture that has not charted the globe and doesn't have this binomial nomenclature about the types of things that live in the sea. And all you know is that it's this place that's deeper than you know, and it extends farther than you know, and there are things in it that will eat you.
And is essentially unknowable. Like there's
right.
no way for you to know, considering the technology of the day or whatever.
I think that's a great point, man. I think that the universe, like outer space to us, is in a sense more accessible than the watery depths were to ancient people.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So it absolutely is this mysterious unknown thing, and we also know. And we see this in places like Genesis, 6, 7, and 8. We also know that people are aware of the destructive power of water. So that when water doesn't stay put, chaos ensues. All right, so for these reasons, there's this cultural understanding that waters are chaotic. And we see that in Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void. Basil did great Hebrew rendition of that. Tohu vabohu, right?
Ooh,
And
yeah.
the Spirit of God hovers over the face of the watery deeps, right? So we have all of that. So what's the Bible saying? Well, let's understand that in the ancient myths, so Enuma Elish or Baal and Yam or the myth of Anzu, in these myths, what happens is that a chaos monster rises up from the deep, and before the chief deity can establish his sovereignty over creation and do something with creation, he has to first put down the chaos monster. But in Genesis chapter 1, there's no presentation of the chaos monster. Instead, in Genesis chapter 1, the Spirit of God hovers over the waters, and then God starts to speak, and by the words of his mouth, this chaotic, formless, empty, watery chaos is transformed not only into stuff, but into ordered stuff with purpose. And so the message of Genesis is that God, from the sovereignty and the sovereign authority of his word, creates and orders and forms chaos. That's something that is distinct from these other myths that say, well, somehow the chief deity has to win his sovereignty before he does that.
Right.
That's a theme when we see this connection in the scriptures, where the scriptures are saying something that makes more sense to us when we understand this ancient Near Eastern cultural concept of the chaos monsters and the chaos of the waters. Anytime we see that, we see a distinction that the God of the Bible, Yahweh God, does not have to do battle to win sovereignty. He's sovereign to begin with.
Dang, that is powerful. Wow, what a revolution. I never thought of it that way. I've also never studied Near Eastern mythos, so, I guess that makes sense. Yeah, we have a creation story that resonates with others at the time, but instead of God defeating chaos, he is simply just commanding it into form, or commanding the chaos. It's not a battle to be won. It is simply an expression of universal control.
Yeah, that's right. And
Wow.
so he already has the authority, right? Even when these and that's something I would call our attention to, that even in the Bible, when we do see beast rising up from the sea. So think about Isaiah 27. That's the Leviathan passage, one that we don't talk about a ton, right? In that day, Yahweh with his hand and great strong sword will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. Notice in that case, what's the Leviathan doing? It's running away. Right?
Yeah.
So it's not that the fight was to show that God was sovereign. Out of his sovereignty, God puts down the beast. Daniel chapter 7, as the beast rise up out of the sea, what does the Ancient of Days do whenever he comes? He sits on the throne and the books are opened in judgment. So it's not the battle between the Ancient of Days and the beast that rises from the sea in Daniel 7. It's the judgment. It's the execution of. Out of his sovereignty, the Ancient of Days sovereignly judges this beast. And I think that what we have to understand there is that when ancient peoples are reading this, again, this gets back to connecting with what did it mean to them in their setting? Well, what it means to them is that this God of the Hebrews is foundationally different than these other myths. He's better than the others. Like he's better than the gods in this other story, because he judges out of his sovereignty. He doesn't have to do battle in order to prove that he's sovereign. He was sovereign to begin with.
Yeah. It's interesting because as I hear you explaining this, and I'm pretty familiar with the line of thinking and the argument, but it's always kind of like it's a chicken or the egg kind of discussion here, where it seems that the biblical account gives this almost like an apologetic against some of these ancient Near Eastern myths, where God, you're saying the same sort of story is being told, except it's demonstrating the authority of Yahweh, and it's almost being done in such a way as a response to some of these other ancient Near Eastern myths. And I think that's one of the things that gives people the idea that maybe, the biblical narrative was invented. But I think it's interesting to consider that if we agree and suppose that the biblical narrative is true and that's actually how it works, then it's not too far a stretch also to believe that the deceiver, that the adversary, the enemy, would come in and would look at what he sees as kind of a true account of these things and sort of twist it himself. So you kind of have almost these competing sort of narratives running side by side, where it's, depending on when you believe Genesis was actually finally composed and put together, it's attributed to Moses. Of course, it probably goes much earlier than that, but it's just an interesting sort of point of consideration for me, and I wonder what you think as to whether or not the biblical narrative is a response to some of these ancient Near Eastern myths. Not to say that that diminishes its truth at all, but is it kind of formed in such a way that it responds to some of these false religious ideas? And then I'm hoping we get to your article in the Daniel 7 thing and how that even relates to, I did my dissertation out of Mark, so the Son of Man imagery has, it plays an important role in Mark, and kind of like a reappropriation, reinterpretation of some of these texts that the New Testament authors have. But I'm wondering, what do you think about that? Do you think that the Genesis account is a response to kind of ancient Near Eastern myths? Is it like God's answer to those sorts of things, or where are you at there?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I don't think that it is primarily a response to those myths. In other words, I think that Genesis, the main purpose of the entirety of the Bible, and Genesis 1 through 3 in particular, is not to tell us what isn't true, but to tell us what is true. Mm-hmm. But in the way that Genesis 1 through 3 especially tells us what is true, what we have happening there is we have it being told in such a way that these other cultures are going to realize, boy, this is distinct. And again, it's countercultural. This does not conform to the expectations of our culture. Let's pause there for a moment, though, and realize something that just sociologically, okay, it's so easy to see where the stories come from about, Marduk being the chief, god of the pantheon, because he killed Tiamat. And here's the reason. That's because that's exactly how human authority was established. Mm-hmm. Human authority was established whenever there was a ruler or an empire that could establish their dominance through violence over all others who were going to contend to any kind of claim of authority. You established your dominance through violence, then you ruled through violence. And what do you do for those that are subjugated to you? You enslave them for your own purposes. Well, that's exactly what we see in those other ancient Near Eastern stories, right? Mm-hmm. What we see gods that gain power through violence, maintain power through violence, and humans are their slaves. And this props up, this is a mythos, this is a religious system that then props up the normative order of life in the ancient world, where you have a king who establishes his authority through violence and rules through violence, and then all those who serve him are just his vassals and his slaves whose lives don't have inherent value.
Wow, that's really good.
So it's very easy for us to see the connections between these two things. But then I come to Genesis, and what does Genesis tell me? Genesis tells me that we are, that humanity all bear the image of God. Well, there's an ancient Near Eastern connection there. That's familiar terminology in the ancient Near Eastern world, because when a king conquers, what he does is he has to set up someone in the conquered territory that is going to rule that territory in his image. Remember, he can't just pick up a phone and call people to tell them what to do. He has to set up a representative ruler in that conquered territory. So whenever we're told that human beings are created in the image of God, what that does is that gives us all the same value in who we are as royalty. Mm. So now, instead of us being just the chattel and the vassals of kings, we instead have to have this understanding of one another and these ethical and moral systems because of the nature of who and what we are, that we say each one of us are like princesses or princes because we bear the image of God. And that's an entirely different system that makes no sense if it flows from ancient Near Eastern culture. That's unique revelation. By the way, it makes no sense flowing from our culture either.
I love it. It's very good.
I don't know why that isn't more powerful, or like to someone who's trying to make the comparison between the Bible and other, similar ancient texts. And I guess the first question is, have you found that to be an effective retort, I guess? And if not, why not? Like, I'm like, to hear you, both of you, just to hear you guys talk about this, and Chris nailing it on the questions here, because I just don't even know where to go. I'm honestly stricken with how powerful the Bible is in this context as a revolutionary set of scriptures. And yet, is it just that people don't know, or that it takes kind of a lot of thinking, or deep thinking, or an openness to its unique story that it's telling? I mean, why is that not a more influential talking point to someone who's trying to make the comparison between the Bible and other texts? Or is this something I'm just hoping would mean something to somebody who is already in opposition to the Bible?
Yeah, I do think part of it's just about confirmation bias, right?
Yeah.
We want to believe what we want. And so if you want to believe that the Bible's not true, and somebody points out to you, well, there's these, similarities, it's very easy to not see, well, actually the similarities here contribute to a polemic that lifts up the worldview of the Bible versus the worldview of these other cultures.
Yeah.
So I think there's, part of it is that we don't go looking for that. But another part of it, I think, Basil, is that we don't, I think whenever, especially I think of this like kind of stereotype in our culture of this, innocent Christian student that goes off to, to college, and the mean atheistic professor turns them to atheism through these types of stories.
Right.
I would say that Christian probably hasn't spent a lot of time reading the Bible.
Totally.
I mean, and this goes back to what Chris was talking about, how do we consider the men and women that we know in our churches that they just read the Bible on a daily basis. They haven't had formal education. Well, I will say this for those sisters and brothers, they're not going to fall prey to this argument. And it's not because they're some type of, backwood, uneducated hick. It's because they've read the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I do think that the Bible, just reading the Bible, is an antidote to a lot of this.
And it's interesting too, because, obviously you guys have dedicated quite a bit of time academically to these sorts of things. But I did go to Bible college, and in Bible college, there were, it's kind of funny to think back on, because you take your Bible classes and similar things, perhaps I was taught these things and I just forgot them or something, but these types of things were taught in the Bible school. It wasn't just a practice in confirming everything that we had known about the Bible and learned growing up in church and stuff. It's almost like there was a concerted effort to make sure that everybody in this Bible school was intimately familiar with these arguments. And whereas someone who's coming against, the legitimacy of the Bible, or even just the unique properties of the Bible, can find that they consider it as a weapon or a good argument. The Bible college itself is like, no, here, let's teach you all of the, things that are considered either inconsistencies or the similarities between other ancient texts and things like this. And it was actually a very strengthening opportunity, a very, emboldening. It just it almost made the Bible more mysterious in the good way, and revolutionary, of course. And so that's when I think it's, we do this show and we have a lot of these types of conversations, and I'm personally very sort of enthusiastic about destabilizing what a lot of church-going Christians take for granted, because I've found it to be an incredibly, first of all, interesting part of the sort of Christian journey, but also not in, I was going to say enlightening, but maybe not that, but an emboldening to understand the texts that you generally grow up just kind of taking for granted. You're like, Bible, true. Yes, everything true. That's all you need to know. No more discussion needed. But to dive deep into kind of these weird parts of even just the culture surrounding the Bible, the conversation surrounding the Bible, the hundreds if not thousands of years old opposition to the commonly held beliefs about the Bible, have just been so valuable to me, and I hope that people are getting that from this episode as well.
Yeah. It's the difference, right, between if you're approaching any subject, and I think we're seeing this in a huge way in the rapid secularization of our culture, is we're seeing secular culture needs to have a dogmatic approach to content, because there's actually an assent in culture. They will acknowledge, this is a truth that we have constructed. That's what postmodernism and poststructuralism does.
Right.
So I would say to those people, hey, come and read the Bible with Christians who actually believe that it's true, and experience the liberation of being able to actually present other arguments.
Yeah.
Because we believe this is true, and we believe that God is going to that if we open ourselves up to inquiry about the Bible and inquiry about the world and about truth from a position of God, we desire to know what's true, that God actually guides us in that journey.
Yeah.
And I will just say, guys, that's a huge difference that's affecting the way that we pursue truth of all kinds as Christians, or should affect how we pursue truth as Christians, versus the postmodern society in which we live, which can only do indoctrination because it's acknowledged that it's manufactured truth.
Yeah. It's one of the areas that led me actually to my kind of academic pursuits. Was I was raised in the church, and when I came into my high school and early college years, started to be confronted with a lot of opposition towards my Christian worldview. And it was something that, it's one of those things that I heard a long time ago, that convictions aren't something that you hold, but convictions are something that holds you. And there was just this thing in me that I could never let go of it. And I wasn't really sure why. And I was hearing all of these interesting kind of and sort of compelling arguments about why Christianity was false and why it was made up, and why it was just something people invented to help them cope with the difficulties of the world. And I just kind of started to believe, if I really believe that this is not just a truth, but the truth, then I need to put it to the test. And what I started to find was that when I stopped being afraid that if I looked into these sorts of things, my whole, worldview and my whole foundation was going to come crumbling down, when I actually did start to put the Bible to the test, and then I started looking at different resources and started reading people that had done a bunch of work, I started to become more and more convinced. And it's actually in those most hard-fought battles and in these difficulties, like even in the creation accounts that we're talking about, in evolutionary theory, and all of these different things where you go to these very difficult battlegrounds, and what you find is that time and time again, just as, we kind of heard you explain brilliantly, and Basil commented on that, it resounds over and over very clearly that this has to be the truth. This has to be what it is. If you really take a step back and you just look at it from, a couple miles away, you see that the Bible really does offer a complete answer to all of the questions that we have of life. And I just to encourage anybody who's listening, if there are these difficult areas where you almost sometimes feel like, I don't want to look over there, because just what if there's something under there that kind of undoes whatever I believe, I would encourage you to go dive headlong into those areas where you feel, kind of reluctant about, because I was kind of the mind, I was like, well, if this thing is a lie, better prove it and figure it out and just get it over with, because what's the point? And then just time and time again, just was more reaffirmed and more solidified in my faith. Kind of reminds me of who wrote A Case for Christ? That was Lee Strobel. That was his whole thing. He went out to disprove Christianity and disprove the resurrection, and then in the process was like, oh, wow, this all actually seems to be true.
Yeah. And I would encourage listeners on that, Chris, just to hear, I don't think what we're saying on this, right, is that, hey, if you're a non-believer, you're an idiot. This is so easy, right? That's not it at all. What it is we as Christians, as those who are following King Jesus because we are convinced that this is true, that we are not doing this out of this just ignorant position towards Christian dogma, that we believe this and we're not willing to have the conversation. It's evil or sinful to have conversations or to look at other arguments. What I do hope, if you're listening to this and you have questions about Christianity, what I hope that you're hearing is we as believers are not afraid to have the conversations because we believe this is really true. Right. And so that's a different expectation for how to pursue truth than we see in the rest of our culture.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I will put myself in danger for a moment, Chris, and say in case there is someone who needs to feel seen in hearing this on the podcast, I want to recognize that even just logically, just because the Bible is unique and different and things like that does not necessarily mean that it is true. And I think it is, but it does remove an obstacle. If you are relying on the idea that the Bible is not unique from other, texts from its time or even any other time, if you're relying on the fact that it is not unique, so therefore it does not call for any more investigation, that is wrong. I mean, that is just erroneous. That it is very unique, and many of those ways have been, recounted here in this podcast. But I could see somebody really balking at the concept that just because it is unique means that it's absolutely true. But I will say, if you are one of those people, at least let that obstacle be removed and investigate further, and let it speak for itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great word there, Basil. And again, like just if there are people that are listening that are more skeptical to some of these truth claims, what Basil is saying here is like super important to understand about Christianity is that Christianity is not a series of arguments that checkmate somebody into belief.
Right.
Yeah.
The ultimate truth claim of Christianity is that that Jesus Christ is God incarnate, who died on a cross for the sins of the world and defeated death in his resurrection, and now beckons those of us who are lost in our sin to confess him as Lord and receive the salvation that he freely offers. If you believe that, then you should be a Christian and follow Christ. And if you don't believe that, you're not a Christian.
Yeah.
So all these other hang-ups that we're talking about are things that as Basil is talking about, like if this is a hang-up for you on this, well, the Bible's just another, religious system. Well, Chris's point, I think, is really clear. No, it's not. It's not just another religious system. So if that's your hang-up, then we would invite you to, reconsider that hang-up and then consider, do you believe that Jesus Christ is God incarnate who has died on a cross and defeated death and offers forgiveness for your sins and offers to be the Lord of your life?
Yeah.
So I do think that's really important and really well said.
I like that you just used an analogy from chess about, it's not a bunch of, arguments to put a person in checkmate. And I don't know if you were intentionally doing that, but it lends itself back to, and this might help people to kind of make a connection between why is it so important to understand these ancient Near Eastern myths and what God is doing. But the point that you made there was that he's not winning through combat. He's not winning through defeating the enemy. And you just said it in the same way when it comes to, our evangelizing and turning people to the faith. It's not about beating them. It's about truth and authority reigning over them, and then people just kind of acknowledging that there is the battle already has been won, and the enemy's already been defeated and vanquished. And this might be perhaps the best time to kind of roll into. I think it's a really interesting discussion. You used in your most recent paper that will be coming out here in the next Jets quarterly about...
Maybe you should mention what Jets is, because I didn't know.
Yeah, it's the Journal for Evangelical Theological Society. So basically, it's pretty much the most prestigious, I guess, magazine, if you will, for academic articles in theological studies. So Cory,
I'll cut in because calling
ahead.
it a magazine sounds like it's entertaining. So for the readers, I just want to say it's for a bunch of super nerdy people like Chris and I. So it's like even if you see
there are no
just
pictures.
Just Google the cover of Jets. It looks boring.
It's still exciting to get it the white cover with just the blue text every few months. But he has
so exciting we print the table of contents on the cover.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because Jet is an actual other magazine. Jet magazine is I think it's like a black culture magazine.
Oh.
So what?
Yeah. Are you presenting this Evangelical Theological Society?
Okay, thank you.
Are you presenting this anywhere, or is it just being published?
I have presented that paper. I have presented like a version of that paper in the past.
Okay, so
look at this. The cover, it's like it's trying to discourage anyone from having any interest in what might be contained within its pages. That is, I respect that very much.
Yeah, it is what it is.
You gotta work.
If anybody is going to hear this who's involved in the leadership of Jets, I want to tell you that I love you and appreciate your work, and it benefits my ministry. But it's also mega boring. All those things are true.
Oh no, but see, I think it's very powerful in that way. This is not.
No fluff.
Nobody will accidentally be drawn into reading this.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, he's got an article coming out, and it touches on a lot of what we've been talking about, but you use as a case study Daniel 7, and the image that we have in Daniel 7 of the Son of Man, and something that ends up coming up, a title that Jesus, kind of invokes for himself in the Gospels. And I read through the article. You sent it to me before the show. It's kind of the most recent thing that you've been working on. And I thought that there were a bunch of kind of interesting points there that can become relevant. And this is one of the things Basil kind of opened with a question, and something that I think a lot of maybe listeners and even people in the church, it's like, okay, you guys are a bunch of Bible nerds, and that's really cool, and you do all of this research and learn all this stuff, but what does it actually mean for me? And I think I used Richard Hayes, kind of his methodology for my dissertation, and he kind of has that 3-tiered approach for the interpretation kind of an Old Testament text, that you have what it originally meant to its Old Testament, if you will, audience, and then how the New Testament author kind of reappropriates it for their immediate audience and what it means about Jesus, and then a 3rd tier, which is what it means then for the church. So I thought it would be interesting if we could walk through that with Daniel 7, something that probably people will know, even if they don't know that they know it, when we start talking about it, and walk through kind of those 3 phases of what did that mean originally when it was written, and then what did that mean when Jesus invoked it of himself, and then what does that mean for us today. And I'd love to chime in when it gets to the New Testament portion. As I said, I wrote in Mark, so I have a lot of thoughts on it, and a lot of it kind of came to my mind as I was reading through your article. So take us into that discussion here, and let's see if that can be fruitful, if we can use that as an example of why all of this stuff actually helps the layperson.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, what I'll do, Chris, is I'll kind of talk about Son of Man in the Old Testament, and then Daniel 7, kind of what I think it's doing. And then I'll kind of hand it off to you to maybe lead us through why Jesus uses that title of himself more than any other title.
Yeah.
So Son of Man, like if we read Ezekiel, Son of Man in Ezekiel is pretty evidently just another way of referring to a human one. So in Ezekiel, God regularly calls Ezekiel Son of Man. And he's not using it as a title. It's like saying, "Oh, human one," you know.
Mm-hmm.
So then we come into Daniel 7, and here's what we have going on in Daniel 7. Just remember the social context of Daniel 7, like the historical context is that Daniel is in, he's captured by the Babylonians. He's there when the Persians take power. So he's living in the exile, and he's living in a world in which these powerful empires have conquered the known world. They've conquered the people of God. They've destroyed the temple, and they rule with absolute power. They have a claim to earthly sovereignty, like no one else in their historical context. So in Daniel 7, God gives Daniel a vision. I want to make really clear, I believe that this is an actual vision that Daniel receives. I also believe that God gives this vision in such a way that it communicates in a particular way when we understand Daniel's context and the world around him. So in this vision, various beasts rise up out of the sea. We're going to have 4 beasts that do this.
More beasts out of the sea.
Yeah, beasts out of the sea, exactly. So we have this theme coming up again. So in a world of chaos, beasts rise up out of the sea. And these beasts pretty evidently represent, I don't know if we can say that the beasts in Daniel 7 represent particular kingdoms. In other words, I don't make any effort to tie, well, this one goes with this kingdom and this one with this kingdom. But what we do see is we see these beasts that are rising up out of the sea that are all like just very obviously destructive forces that no one's going to want to mess with. The final beast that rises up is this great beast that rises up out of the sea. It's got 10 horns on its head, and these horns are signs of power. That's the idea of a horn, right? So it's like, here comes this beast. It's the biggest, baddest beast, and it's got all the power. And then another horn rises up on its head, and this horn begins to speak mocking words. This sounds a lot like some of these other ancient Near Eastern stories that we've talked about, like Enuma Elish or the Baal and Yam cycle, the myth of Anzu, these types of things. So you've got a chaos monster that's risen up out of the sea, and it's speaking mocking things. And then we're told that the Ancient of Days comes and that the court is convened. And we have, as we have in those other ancient Near Eastern stories, we have the chief of the pantheon is silent. He's quiet. But he's not quiet because he's scared, like in all the other story. He's quiet because he's sovereign, and he's sitting in judgment. And then we have the beasts dispensed with. So the beast is put to death. The Ancient of Days doesn't fight him; he just dies. He's put to death based on the judgment. He's executed. This again is flowing from the sovereignty of the Ancient of Days. And then after the beast is put down, at the right hand of the Ancient of Days is one like the Son of Man. So notice the title there, one like a Son of Man, meaning one that looks like a human one. So that's picking up from the Son of Man from Ezekiel. He looks like a human one. And he's at the right hand of the Ancient of Days. And what does the Ancient of Days do? He gives him authority and power and dominion over every people and language. So here's the story, like here's the purpose of the vision. Who really rules the earth? Well, it is in fact not these kings that rule out of power and violence. It's not actually the Babylonians or the Persians who are in control. It's God. And what is God's purpose? He is going to put down these kingdoms and give all authority to the one like a Son of Man. So Chris, I'll let you kind of take it from there. So that comes into the New Testament, and Jesus uses the title Son of Man because...
Yeah. So it is the primary title that Jesus uses for himself in the Gospel of Mark. And you have throughout the New Testament, you have Rome kind of being used alongside of Babylon. It's almost like they're part of the same system, right? So you have basically...
Rome's gonna be... the imagery in Revelation about the beast seems very clearly to be associated with it.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, Babylon is almost synonymous with Rome. And Mark, you have him writing to his audience. Almost all of scholarship believes that Mark is writing to the church in Rome in the mid-60s AD, who are at the height of state-sponsored persecution. So what you have is it's almost the same context into which Daniel is writing, where you have the people of God being oppressed by this Babylonian, if you will, sort of dictatorship. They're ruling by violence, just like you said. Their domination is being asserted kind of throughout the known world. And of course, the Roman Empire there in the ancient Near East, they asserted control over the entire Western world, essentially there, and the Near Eastern world through force and through violence. So you have the Christian church is kind of undergoing a very similar situation as ancient Israel was with Babylon. And then you have Mark in his depiction of Jesus, and he's continually using this title, the Son of Man. And it was really interesting. I was just reading here recently. We're going through John at my church, and John, not as often as Mark, nearly as often as Mark, invokes the Son of Man imagery. But one of the things that's interesting is people, especially in John, it's like, well, he's supposed to be the Son of God, particularly in John, but why is it that he's the Son of Man? And when you read back in that Daniel 7 prophecy, and I love in your article, you made it clear kind of effortlessly, Cory, without even trying. I don't know if you did, but the fact that this actually was a true vision of Jesus that Daniel was given. And the thing that's interesting about it is when people are reading through that prophecy, the character there that's coming on the clouds, with authority, he's obviously deity. So he's obviously God. What's unique about him is that he appears as a man, and that's why he takes the title the Son of Man. And it's like, well, why wouldn't he be the Son of God? Or why wouldn't you associate God with him? Why are you associating his manhood? And that's because he's obviously God, but what's unique about him is he's also man. So you have this kind of combination of those two, and that's the image. It's that image of authority that Jesus is invoking when he's taking that title on himself. And like you've been explaining kind of all through this conversation, Jesus, what he does is he doesn't conquer through conquest. He doesn't conquer through, even as kind of the Jews expected that Messiah would do, that he would come in and he would be some kind of military leader like David who would kind of vanquish the enemy through force, but he actually comes in and he conquers not through putting his enemies to death, but through dying himself. He conquers death through death. And it is that kind of display of authority that ends up winning out in the day. And as Mark's audience is reading and they're being drawn back to this kind of Son of Man imagery, and they're thinking about the state of the nation of Israel being in Babylonian captivity and being ruled by violence, they can see almost a one-to-one corollary where they're at in the first century being persecuted by the Roman Church. So it helps you to understand in that context, when Jesus invokes that name, that it had a great deal of significance to these people when they start to hear him using that. And while they might not have understood it until after the resurrection, certainly around the time that Mark is writing, we're starting to get a clearer understanding of the mission and vision of Jesus. Of course, even the disciples didn't fully understand it until after the resurrection. But we start to get a picture that this is actually how God is winning this battle, if you want to. And it almost sometimes seems trivial to call it a battle, because it's not really a fight. That's kind of what you've been saying all along this whole time, Cory, is that he's already in control. God is already in authority. By the word of his mouth, he is ruling and reigning. So it's not so much of a fight for God, but us being kind of in the already and not yet, are caught kind of in that struggle and in that tension. But yeah, as far as the New Testament kind of usage, and I guess if you want to call it a reappropriation of that imagery, I think that instance in Mark is probably the best. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I mean, I think that's why Jesus uses it. I just think it's important for us to connect that when Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, it's a claim saying, I am the one who's at the right hand of the Ancient of Days in Daniel 7. Mm-hmm. It's a claim to authority. Now, as you said, the disciples have just a tremendous, and let's be honest, understandable difficulty in processing the things Jesus says about the Son of Man. Like Mark chapter 8 is one of I think it's kind of the hinge of Mark, right? Where we start moving from, in chapter 9 we get the transfiguration. After the transfiguration, there's kind of a beeline towards Jerusalem, and the crucifixion. All right, so as we're leading up to that story, in Mark 8:29, famous verse, Jesus asked Peter, who do you say that I am? And Peter answers, you are the Christ, you're the Messiah. And then in 31, so just one verse, so 30, Jesus charges them not to say anything to anyone, right? It's a Mark and secret thing. And then 8:31, it says, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man, there's the title, must suffer many things. And then in 32, what's Peter going to do? He's going to take him aside to rebuke him. And the reason for that, I think, is pretty easy to see, is because Peter's saying, hey, Jesus, listen, the Son of Man doesn't suffer. The Son of Man is the one who's in charge.
Yeah.
And so what Jesus is doing there is Jesus is showing us that these expectations that the Old Testament gives us about what God is doing, that there's going to be the conquest of God that is going to be ruled by the Messiah, that God is going to place the Son of Man in authority over all peoples. But how is that going to come? It's going to come through the suffering of his servant. And Jesus is telling his disciples, I am that person who fulfills both expectations. And that baffles them.
Yeah.
They want the victory without the means of the victory, which in this case is going to be that Jesus suffers. By the way, he suffers not for his own victory. He is the Son of Man. That's out of the authority of the Ancient Days. He already rules. What Jesus is purchasing is our redemption in that kingdom.
Yeah. Well, and it is the ultimate show of authority too. I mean, as you were saying, it's not hard to understand why people would have, a difficulty with the model that Jesus is acting out, that he's going to conquer through death. But really, when you think about it, if the most powerful way that you could assert your authority would be to say to your enemy, do your worst. Like, here I am. I offer myself freely to you. Do the very worst that you could possibly do to me. And then after they've done their worst, on the other side, you come out victorious. You say, what, death? Is that the best that you can do? The best that you can do is kill me? And then you conquer death and you come back from death. And that is the ultimate display of authority. There is perhaps no greater way that someone could demonstrate their authority than to offer themselves to their enemies and then to demonstrate I suppose the conquest of their enemies through the reversal of kind of the punishment that their enemies would want to put on them. So
that's Philippians 2, right?
Yeah.
So Jesus, who being in very nature God, he doesn't have to achieve being in nature God. He is in very nature God. Does not consider equality with God something to be selfishly held on to, but humbles himself and becomes obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, he is given the name that is above every name. So in other words, this is, what you're saying here, that whenever someone says to their enemies, I'm not going to subject you to violent conquest. I'm instead going to allow you to do violence on me and still come through victorious. No one else wins a victory like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's, again, it's unique.
Yeah. And a complete demonstration of supreme authority. What do you think, Basil?
Dang. I feel like I should have doctor in front of my name now for simply staying quiet for this long. I mean, that was a true accomplishment. Those who know me and have listened to me for years know that I am now have become a very, very powerful academic through all of this. Now, and it continues, I'm trying to observe why is this mode of thinking not more of a movement within the church, but also just within theological discussion. I feel like the conversation so often gets so caught up in other things that the very concept that you guys are talking about, the broadness that it opens up the conversation to include so many more people. I kind of wanted to say there, either perspectives or participation or angles in which to participate. But I feel like if this was something that was a little bit, just the general philosophy that you guys are talking about would open this up so much more. But it is so obviously takes so much energy to fully comprehend and communicate. And I guess this is just another product of our tiny little human brains, and also living in a modern culture that has to worry about, the new Thor movie and stuff. Do you find that this conversation is being had in a broader context anywhere in popular culture? Either of you?
Yeah, I do think that this is something that rarely gets off the ground from like more, I think, sort of scholastic perspectives. And I think the reason is because, especially in evangelical culture, we're not particularly good at looking at this type of material and then applying it in such a way that it's meant for the people of God. We tend to look at this type of material and apply it in such a way that it really plays well with other scholars. And so one of the things that I really am trying to encourage in my own ministry, but also in the ministry of others, is to say, okay, how do we take this information and talk about it in such a way that it ends up not just in academic papers and presentations and books and those kind of things. How does it end up in sermons and Bible studies and devotional reading? And I think part of it is when we start looking at these issues of ancient Near Eastern background and how we read stories and how we understand the Bible, and we say, okay, well, ultimately this isn't just about apologetics. How do I defend whether I believe in God or not?
Right. Yeah.
And it's not just about history, but instead God has revealed himself through this culture in such a way that should increase my sense of wonder about who God is.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I don't mean to cut you off. I'm just excited about what you're saying here. It kind of reminds me. You almost feel to me like the other side of a coin, of which you're juxtaposed to Dr. Peter Rollins that we've had on the show a couple of times. It is and he's a psychoanalyst, philosopher, structuralist type of fella, and it feels like the discussion here really is its own form of like structuralism. We're talking about a framework in which to have conversations, in a framework of thinking, and almost like a structural idea of what the Bible is and means. And of course, not to take anything away from the true, simple message of the gospel. But the structure of what you guys are exploring here, I guess the structuralism is sort of an abstract and difficult thing to talk about because it does not lend the type of certainty that feels good on a Sunday morning or feels good in sort of an identitarian type of way when it comes to, the Christian culture. But it has a sort of different flavor of certainty that inherently includes like mystery and unknowing and broad, beautiful brush strokes that can it really affect the mode of thought rather than particular data points as a currency of belief.
Yeah. Yeah. I have mentioned on the show before, and we'll do it again, that I read one time someone talking about the progression of the academic degrees that they acquired, and they talked about, getting a bachelor's degree and they thought they knew everything, and then getting a master's degree and realizing they thought that they knew a little bit about something, and then attaining a PhD and realizing that they knew nothing about anything. And it's kind of like the more knowledge that you gain, kind of the more you understand that there is to be gained, and the fact that you are just scratching the surface. And it's one of the things that I try to encourage everybody who has a relationship with God. If we're talking about this in kind of this temporal and tangible world that we live in, and even in the realm of biblical studies, and a lot of times in academia, we can fall prey to kind of poking and prodding the Bible like it's some kind of thing, but it is the living Word of God, and it's the wisdom that is contained in it and the application that can be brought from it is legitimately eternal, and it will never pass away. Into eternity, we will be reflecting on the Word of God. So when you come into contact with it, it is a thing, mentioned on the show before. I don't remember who said this, but they said the Bible's the only book that when you read it, it reads you. That there's this kind of participation that's going on. And when you come into relationship with God, it should continue to draw you further and further and further in. And one of the wonderful things that that I love about the academic pursuit of the Bible is that if we can remember that this is not just scholastic work that we're doing here, but it is actually spiritual in nature, then it should continue to draw us deeper and deeper. And I just count it as such an incredible privilege that I get to do it as work, that you get to uncover these truths and these mysteries that are in the Bible. That's what you do for a living, and then you get to share them with people, because of course when you find out these things, you can't just keep them to yourself. You have to share them. So I don't remember the first part of what you were talking about, but towards the end, that was where my mind was going with it all. Don't know if Cory has a thought on that.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that, Chris, because I agree with what both of you guys are saying, is just that there's I think for guys like us, I think this applies to all three of us. Chris, for you and I doing being the Bible nerd kind of thing, it's just important for us to see that this is a unique way in which we get to serve the people of God. Mm-hmm. All of us get to explore and not just explore, but to know more about who God is through our Christian lives. And I would say that for all of us as Christians, that we are, delighting in learning more and more about who God is. One of the things that we have to protect against when we have these conversations is that, just because of like education or intellect, that doesn't make you a better Christian. Yep. Norris Scruggs, our provost here at the seminary, he and I did this book for college students. And one of the things we said in the book is we said that, Christianity is, and I think what we actually said is that the kingdom of Jesus is no respecter of intellect. Mm-hmm. Some of the most brilliant people in the world are not Christians, and some of the simplest people in the world are. And so we don't come to faith. We don't become better Christians by being smart. Yeah. Instead, what this is about understanding that our God is glorious and complex and mysterious and transcendent. And he has, in his grace to us, invited us to know more and more about who he is. And so, Chris, I see our roles, brother, just as we get this tremendous blessing of just helping guide others to know more about God, not to become smarter or better scholars, but instead to help people know more about God, because it glorifies God and it blesses God's people. And so yeah, it's a wonderful thing. It's just a demonstration of God's grace that he allows us all to be on this journey.
Yeah. There have been times that I have thought about, considered my work in ministry and teaching at the college and those sorts of things, and you just kind of you feel so humbled and so blessed, because it's like my job is to be a Christian. Like I'm getting paid to do the work that we're all instructed to do in the Word, is to be diligent students of the Word, and to be people who preach and to teach. And I think that there are people who certainly have certain giftings and callings towards those things specifically, but it's not anything that is foreign to any one of us. And I think that every single person has that kind of calling to know God, and then to share what they know about God with others. And it is really kind of a humbling thought to think, oh man, we get to do this full time. I wouldn't choose anything else. I probably wouldn't. There might be something that would be tempting, rock star or something like that, if I was incredibly talented, but
belly dancer.
Oh, nobody wants to see that.
Fire dancer, fire breather.
Piracy has always been my backup.
Piracy is always an option. Not a whole lot of credentials needed to get into piracy.
Yeah, that's right. You need an eye patch and a parrot,
and a love of booty, and you can be a pirate. Yeah. Wow. Well, goodness gracious, this is. I was not expecting to be as impacted as I was. Of course, nothing to say of my expectations of how wonderful and good-looking you are there, Cory, but I was not expecting to be so viscerally impacted by your work. Is there something that we're missing before, I feel that landing the plane is eventually a good idea. We're about an hour and a half in, but was there something that we're missing? Is there something that's burning within you that a topic we need to make sure to not leave in the ether?
Man, I think it's been just a really productive conversation, Basil. I've enjoyed getting to talk with you guys about just the wonders of God as revealed in His Word. And I would say, just as a closing note about ancient Near Eastern context and how that informs us, is just for everyone who's listening, just to be encouraged that the purpose of the Bible is to reveal the triune God to us. And that's God is gracious in this purpose. And so I think what we've kind of been able to talk about here is, here's some of these kind of different and strange parts of the Bible. And I hope if there's encouragement in this beyond just the content we've talked about, it's, as you're reading the Bible as a believer, don't shy away from those passages, lean into them. Mm-hmm. Because I think through those passages, God is just revealing things about Himself that help us grow in our wonder of God and grow in our relationship with Him.
Amen.
Indeed. Amen. All right. Well, is there a way that people, we know that if somebody is feeling especially compelled to interact with your work, they soon can seek out a copy of the Journal of the Evangelical Theological Society.
Pretty sure you have to be a member, don't you?
Oh, they can do what they need to do, and they can fight the sort of the impulse to, again, the cover of this sucker. You really got to want it. You got to want it, because if you don't want it enough, you'll reach out your hand and find that your eyes sort of slip away from it almost supernaturally. You can't focus on it, you can't reach it, but only by the sort of empowering of the Holy Spirit will you be able to fully seek this out. Is there another way that people can interact with your work or get in touch, or do you want people to interact with your work or get in touch? Let the people know what to do.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So I would tell you guys that if you look at the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary website, we have contact information for all of our faculty, and mine is on there. Mm-hmm. My email is cbarnes@nobts.edu. If you want to look at the list of our other faculty, you'll find a lot of those sisters and brothers are substantially more qualified than I am, so you can ask them questions as well. And then also, if you want to follow me on social media, I think my Twitter thing is @CoryRyanBarnes. I do share some videos and articles from time to time, and there's times when even an article like the one that's coming out in Jets, as the author, I get to publish that or post that in some social media forums. People don't have to pay to become a member to read the article. So I would be glad to, I'll be making those things available as I can as well.
Wonderful. Excellent. All right, everybody. Thank you for coming here once again, and sitting patiently and being filled up with all sorts of knowledge and perspectives that you weren't expecting and perhaps weren't even desiring. But we appreciate you being here. And Cory, more than anything, we're going to have you come back, buddy, because this was a real blast. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, buddy.
And there you have it, folks. See, I told you you were in for a treat. Yes,
you told all
and
of us.
I only knew that because Chris told me that we were in for a treat. So, but what is intellect if not stealing the words of people who are smarter than us?
Yeah, well,
probably not that. It probably actually isn't that, is it?
Yeah. I guess it's difficult. I've heard somebody say one time that you stand on the shoulders of giants and become one yourself. So it's lest anybody ever thinks that anybody who's really, brilliant and has a lot of wonderful, interesting things to say, came up with those all on their own. We all, every single one of us in our lives, in every area of our lives, are the product of all of those who have gone before us. So, yeah, it's one of the fun things about, what we get to do here, Basil, you and I. I mean, we just get to have these fascinating conversations all the time. We grow little by little and just keep on adding all of this information to the tank that we have, and then we get to turn around later on and say, to people, did you know? And then say something brilliant, and they think, we're really smart. But ultimately, it's all been said and done somewhere else before. So.
And the only thing that could be more enjoyable than having these conversations ourselves, Chris, is being one of the lucky people who just get to listen to us have these conversations. So
I was thinking that actually for our listeners, that it is not to be, any kind of prideful or anything, but it is a blessing.
It's not about us.
Yeah, it's a blessing to be able to listen to content like this. It really
if I could listen, if there was any way, I don't know how this would even work, but if there was a way that I could listen to myself have the conversation that I just had, that would change everything. But alas, technology has not brought us there yet. So it is you, dear listener, who gets the benefit. And thank you so much for doing so and coming back and listening when you do. And if this is your first episode, I highly encourage you to check out some of the other episodes. And once you do that and realize just what a blessing you are in our lives, will you go and leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts? Yeah. It's really important. I know every podcast in the world asks for ratings and reviews, but it is indeed one of the kindest things that you can do, not just for the podcasters themselves, but for the world, because then the world knows to come listen to this podcast. You can do that so many different ways, but if you do it on Apple Podcasts, that would be fantastic. Just leave some stars and tell people what to expect, and hopefully you liked it, and that would be great. And more than anything, we get to read them and enjoy them and share them on the show on our next Asked and Not Answered episode. But it also activates the sort of hive mind of algorithmic robots that use that as a signal to share this podcast to other people. And that's very helpful for us. So thank you very much.
Indeed.
If you have any questions or comments about this, you can go ahead and send us an email at contact@ravelpodcast.com. And we would love to address your questions as well.
Yeah.
Anything you want to say here before we go?
No, I'm a little behind on the mailbag. I'll get to it. If you sent something and it hasn't been responded to in a while, it will be eventually. And then I had mentioned at the front that Dr. Barnes, Cory, has a YouTube channel. Doesn't look like he has a whole lot up there, but he's got 2 posts in the last month, so there might be a trend moving forward where he's going to be posting these kind of short lectures. So it's just Cory Barnes, CoryBrnes. We'll try to put a link in the show notes, and you guys can go and get some free teaching. Maybe we should start doing little YouTube videos. Do you think?
It's all you, buddy. You have the freedom and the power to do that.
Yeah, we have. We've mentioned
easily within your grasp.
We have some stuff moving forward here as we approach our kind of 1-year anniversary. Kind of trying to take things to the next level, if you will.
Next level.
Yeah, and one of those things may be some of these kind of short little teachings that would go up on YouTube or something like that, or some of these different social media venues. So keep an eye out for that, and if that's something you'd be interested in, let us know, because it always helps when people say, oh yeah, I would watch that. Otherwise it's just kind of like, maybe this is enough. Is it enough what we're doing? Are we doing enough, do you think?
It's never enough.
It's never enough.
Nothing is ever enough.
Good to know.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening to this episode of Ravel, and we can't wait to have you back next time. But until then, Chris, any last words?
Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to Ravel. To learn more about who we are, what we believe, or how to support this ministry, visit our website at ravelpodcast.com. If you have a question you would like answered on the show, or to let us know how we're doing, email us at contact@ravelpodcast.com. This project is made possible by the prayers and generosity of listeners just like you.
That could be the next intro music.
Yeah.
If we ever changed it.
It's where I won't even charge you for it. Royalty free. Like everything I do in life.
Well, it's for the Lord.
And in that case, it is royalty free.
You're going to go there.